Borne through the central nave, flanked by more than 200 of his cardinals, towards the east portico and out of St. Peter's for a final time. Into the sunshine of a perfect spring day. A simple service at his request, said the Vatican, if anything can be described as simple in front of the greatest of Renaissance basilicas, before a congregation estimated at 400,000. Not just the leader of a church, but also a head of state, attended by around 170 of his fellow heads of state and government, the leaders of America and Britain, France and Ukraine, in the front row as the world's Catholics bade farewell to their pontiff, led by their cardinals, and less usually by hundreds of bishops and clergymen. The length of the Via della Conciliazione that runs from Vatican City down towards the Tiber, a sea of the faithful.
Offerte vobis pace.
Offer your peace was the request, as congregants and world leaders alike offered a handshake as the sign of peace to their neighbour. The eulogy quoted Pope Francis's own often repeated words on war and peace.
La guerra lascia sempre il mondo peggiore.
War always leaves the world worse than it was before. It is always a painful and tragic defeat for everyone.
Sempre una dolorosa e tragica sconfitta.
So no one would have been happier than Pope Francis that before the service, this coming together of world leaders had seen an extraordinary meeting in a side transept of St. Peter's. Even before the coffin was brought out, Presidents Trump and Zelensky were led to single chairs to talk alone, without advisors or translators, for 15 minutes. Given their last disastrous encounter in the White House, this was high risk. In the event, the two sides called the talks productive and constructive, Zelensky suggesting it was potentially historic. The final journey was not, as is traditional, to a crypt within the Vatican, but across Rome in an hour-long motorcade towards Pope Francis's favourite Roman church, the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore. A chance for those who couldn't get into St. Peter's Square to stand and applaud, or simply to pray, as the coffin was driven past the Colosseum and many of the great sights of Rome. It was his particular request that he be buried here in a simple coffin, in a tomb marked simply with the name Franciscus, near to the most important Catholic icon of St. Mary, at which, as Pope, he would frequently come to pray. After a service this evening, he will be buried in the earth in the manner of St. Francis of Assisi, after whom, 12 years ago, he had taken his papal name. James Mates, ITV News, the Vatican.
Well, this Pope's obvious affection for the poor and the meek was returned many thousandfold today. He was known as the People's Pope, and around 400,000 of those people came out to see him off on his final journey. Rachel Younger spoke to some of them.
Early morning in Rome, and it feels like an entire city is on the move. The crowd seems to multiply with every passing second. The final chance to say goodbye is almost here. Trying to reach St. Peter's is simultaneously exhausting and joyful. Security staff are herding the faithful. Students are singing. And for 9-year-old Tawana from Nottingham, it's a lot to take in.
Does it feel happy or sad to be here?
It feels happy because we get to celebrate the Pope's funeral, but also a bit sad because the Pope died.
Will you miss him?
Yeah.
So will these young Catholics from Chile who've crossed continents to honour one of their own.
The first Latin American Pope, and I think he was one of the most normal popes, like in the sense that he was really human.
It feels like everyone's welcome and everyone's here.
There's still an hour to go before the funeral begins, and we are 400 metres away from the basilica, but as you can see, there isn't an inch to spare.
In amongst it all, there are still moments to reflect and pray, with young faces everywhere. Until the Pope's death, this weekend was meant to be a teenage jubilee celebration, and in a way, it still is.
What do you think he would have made of today?
As it is for today, it's a day that we, the young people in the world, we missed him.
Then, at 9:45, the crowd falls silent, and prayers for Pope Francis fill this place. People seeking a glimpse of the service wherever they can. By noon, those who couldn't get into the Vatican are lining the streets outside to say their goodbyes.
I think joy, because he's walking for a long journey, but this is the best Pope I have ever heard and seen.
At Santa Maria Maggiore, the Pope's final resting place, they're following every moment. Anticipation of his arrival filling the air, phones held aloft.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw him with many phones in front of me, so it was very touching to see all these people here praying and clapping.
You are Buddhist?
Yes.
And yet this Pope still touched your heart?
Yes, he was a brilliant personality from the world.
Because despite all the pomp, this was at heart a celebration of a man who was happiest surrounded by people. Today, that's exactly what he was. Rachel Younger, ITV News, Rome.
Well, let's go back to James in Rome now. And James, there was a lot of diplomacy on the sidelines of this funeral. What was the ultimate outcome of that?
Well, we don't know yet, but we do know that the atmosphere has improved significantly. Not only was it the body language at that meeting and the readouts from the two sides, but President Trump went after the ceremony, headed back to his flight home on Air Force One, and on the way, he said on social media some of the strongest criticism of Vladimir Putin that he has ever said, castigating him for continuing to fire missiles into civilian areas. And then he said this: "It makes me think that maybe he, Putin, doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently." Now, we know how much Trump's moods can swing, but the Ukrainians will definitely like this particular shift in his rhetoric. They are working very hard with Europe on an alternative peace plan to that being arranged by America and Russia. Zelensky, after the ceremony, met first with Sir Keir Starmer, in which he said that the Trump talks had gone very well, and then after that with President Macron of France. The Ukrainian-European plan, if I could call it that, it differs from the American one in a significant way, that the Ukrainians will no longer insist on being allowed into NATO, nor on getting all their land back immediately. And those are two big moves towards the American position.